So I'm going to be covering multiple topics here. I'll try to put a breakdown of the timings in the description below so that you can jump over sections that you don't want to listen to. The general topics will be an overview of the Rynn's World campaign as I played it, alternate or house rule for attrition and replacements, aircraft review, first of the Orcs and then the Imperial Navy. But before I go too deep into the analysis, I thought I would point out something from the last mission I hadn't noticed before. With only a 10-point difference between the Imperials and the Orcs, if the Imperials had destroyed that last base instead of just damaging it and leaving one structure point behind, the Orcs would lose 5 points, the Imperials would gain 5 points, and the game would have been a draw. That's how close the game was, and I hadn't even realized it when I was adding up the points. Just a quick little hey moment after I had already posted the previous video. Something to contemplate. I think this is the closest to a draw I've ever seen in Aeronautica. So about the campaign itself, what did I like? First, I liked the rules for the various aircraft. They seemed right. A Dacajet screaming along at top speed wouldn't be able to pirouette like a ballerina and be more maneuverable than an Imperial Thunderbolt traveling 2 to 3 speed below the Dacajet. The Dacajet instead gave up some maneuverability to get the speed it wanted, where the Thunderbolt was more maneuverable. Those kind of differences make a huge difference in a game to me. Besides the aircraft seeming to play right, the Orcs and Imperials play so differently. Orcs want to get in close, do a knife fight, whereas Imperials like to stand off a bit further, shooting at medium range. This means races aren't cookie cutters, and you require different skills and thought patterns to play them well. Again, I always like it when there's some difference between the sides. While some people may complain about the points increase of the Thunderbolt and the Thunderbolt Fury, I think this campaign proves just how good they are. Against the Orcs, the Thunderbolts were definitely under cost. I don't know if others will agree or want to increase the points more, but I think we need to see how these planes will perform against other races and other new aircraft before we go too crazy on points adjustments. Also, with regards to the missions in the book, I like the variety. They weren't all everyone rush to the middle and shoot everybody else down. And extra points for some missions could potentially swing the battle one way or another. That last mission, the bombing mission, is a good example. If they had managed to destroy that last structure point, the Imperials would have gotten a draw instead of a loss, and they had lost effectively all their aircraft. Only one escaped. I think the hardest missions, though, to play are those that require landing transports, as those transports are completely helpless on the ground. They can't do any shooting. Maybe consider a house rule saying the dorsal turret that shoots up could still be able to shoot. I don't know. That's something else I would have to sit down and really consider. As to things I would change, well, as this was a solo campaign, I had decided to have the high roll be forced to go first for initiative rather than trying to decide which each race would prefer. Pretty much the same as match play in 40K. Looking back, I think that was a mistake. There were definitely times when the winner of the roll could or would have decided to go second, and yet not all the time. I think I would go back to the winner needs to decide who has the initiative. The Orcs winning the initiative that often and having been in such poor position, you know they would have wanted to change. While it didn't really impact the Imperial Navy so much, as their fighters in this campaign were more or less interchangeable, the low points of the squadrons really impacted the Orcs as to what was available to them. Looking back, I would want about 100 points more than the largest possible game. As the battles were maxed out at 250 points, I think I would have pushed for squadrons of 350 points. This would allow for more variety in those races where it could make a difference. For example, I could have bought more Dakajets. I could have bought more Fighter-Bombers. And in that situation, that would have allowed me to have missions where I went all DACA jets or all fighter bombers, and I wouldn't be hampered with having to have a hodgepodge of both that didn't work well together in a particular mission. Out of extra points, I think I would allow campaign players to use it to buy extra hardpoint munitions, such as the missiles or rockets or bombs, etc. The only thing I hadn't decided is should the cost of extra weapons on hardpoints be a permanent cost from the surplus points and the weapons are gone next turn, or if the cost of the weapons are refunded back to surplus after each mission. I'd sort of like to reward those people who decided they wanted to take the hardpoint weapons at the very beginning and continue to use them. So right now I'm leaning towards a refund and permanent cost for those who buy them when they first set up their squadrons. I really didn't like the attrition rules. The basic replace with equal value statement doesn't work for me. It made choosing my aircraft upgrades and weapon upgrades and changes more difficult during the squadron setups. The best example is my beefing up the cost of a Marauder bomber with extras so it could match the cost of a Marauder destroyer. My logic was I could then replace one type with the other if it became necessary or desirable. So I'll discuss that more later as I talk about my house rule. Along with the attrition rules, waiting to be shot down isn't always the best time to make squadron changes. Instead of a plain attrition rules, possibly add a rule that describes how and when you could replace an aircraft with a different type with different options. Again, as I said, my orcs, if I had known how badly so few DACA jets worked, I would have bought more DACA jets. Midway, if I had had a rule for replacements, I could have replaced the fighter bombers with DACA jets or vice versa. And finally, after most of the missions were done, I realized I misread the Lucky Aces rule in the campaign. It wasn't just those that had accomplished 5 kills that got to have a saving rule for themselves. It was anyone who survived 2 or more missions. However, the way I was ruling, chances of anyone having passed, I doubt it. I'm pretty sure everyone would have died, but it bugs me that I messed up that rule. So I'll have to watch out for that in the future. So I'm going to go over some proposed house rules, and the first one I'm going to do is a reserve fund. When setting up your squadrons, I think I would allow that not all points allocated for squadron use need to be used. Any extra the players can keep in a reserve fund of surplus points. The reserve fund can be no more than 25% of the points originally allowed for the squadron set up in the campaign. So for example, a 200 point squadron would only be able to keep 50 points in the reserve fund to start with. And this goes into my next house rule, the ability to purchase extra weapons. So players would be able to use reserve fund to purchase additional weapons available to the aircraft. These would be things like the bombs, the missiles, the rockets, etc. Additional weapon cards or any weapons that show up below the picture of the card in the manuals. They cannot be used to replace main weapons associated with the base cost of an aircraft or aircraft upgrades. And to spell out what main weapons are, I'm referring to those weapons that are hard mounted or appear on the aircraft cards as part of the cost of the aircraft, either from the decks or the pictures of the cards in the books. Aircraft upgrades are the list of race-specific upgrades at the beginning of each race's squadron list. And then finally, after the mission that they were purchased for, weapons are lost, whether the plane was shot down or not, whether the weapons were used or not. If they are needed for the next mission, the player will need to buy them again, the cost coming from your refund or reserve fund. So while you can buy rockets and bombs or whatever you wish, that will reduce your reserve fund over time. If you purchase the weapons at the time you're creating the squadron or buying a replacement aircraft, you don't pay to renew the weapons, as they are available for every mission for no extra cost. Replacing an extra weapon that was purchased with the original aircraft, that would count as buying a replacement aircraft. The player will have to purchase a new aircraft with a new configuration and suffer the appropriate penalties, or buy the aircraft with no extra weapons and then pay for them as needed. If you like to use specific hardpoint weapons, I want it to be cheaper in the long run if you take them when you purchase the aircraft for the squadron. So my final and probably most cantankerous rule is the attrition/replacement rule. I think instead, aircraft shot down can be replaced with the same aircraft type with the same options. That includes aircraft upgrades and extra weapons for free and are available for the very next mission or campaign turn. Now that includes the same main weapon. As an example, you can't replace a Barracuda with a railgun with a Barracuda with a burst cannon and use it next turn. This is encourage you to take more care in your squadron selection at the beginning and reward players for sticking to the same aircraft. Aircraft that are shot down should be able to be replaced with different aircraft. First, the points value of the destroyed aircraft are added to the reserve fund. Then the new aircraft is bought and equipped with whatever options the player wants, assuming he has the spare points in the reserve fund. However, because they're making a change, the new aircraft will not be available for the next campaign turn or mission. Again, this is a penalty for those players who have not successfully planned their squadrons as well as someone who does. And the final option, aircraft can be replaced with different aircraft without having been destroyed between the missions. Again, the aircraft you don't want, your points go back into the reserve fund. The new aircraft with whatever options you want are bought using the points from the reserve fund. However, as the original aircraft was not destroyed, the new aircraft will not be available for 2 missions or campaign turns. Again, this is more or less to show that the procurement is delayed because you had a perfectly good aircraft. And finally, instead of the missions or campaign turns, especially for those players doing a shorter campaign turn, make it possible for the players to pay from the reserve fund an extra 5 points per campaign turn to speed up deployment. After all, you have to bribe those procurement officers to get to top of the list. So I proposed a 5 points per 1 turn delay. So delay of 1 turn costs you 5 points from reserve, 10 points for a 2-turn delay to be removed. So planning for the next campaign. Obviously the Taros campaign makes the most sense. It's the second book in the series. Things that have been happening. First, my vultures just arrived from Forge World this last week. They were on back order so long I forgot I had ordered them. And in fact, I was going to order more because I had forgotten I'd placed an order. And while I have enough Tau forces painted up and ready to go, I haven't started painting the new Imperial stuff yet. I didn't want to rush the paint job, and I wanted to do them more or less all together so they look consistent. So I may end up doing some missions in bare plastic if I take too long. Forgive me if I do. New Imperial ground defenses, I've got a few of those. I ordered a limited number as I already have the old style Hydra flak platforms and the Manticore missiles. We'll see how quickly I can fix those up that I do have, but I may or may not stick to the old defenses as they're ready. One of the biggest problems I foresee in the Taros campaign is the rolling area of engagement rule. 3 missions I think are using it. These missions require 3 map sections, 12 by 12 hexes. Unfortunately, the standard GW cardboard maps are too big if opened completely or too small folded down to 1 panel. I can do a 12 hex wide by 9 hex long section if I fold it to only use 4 of the 6 map sections exposed, and I'll probably just use that. I checked the paper maps in the box set. They're also too big. You would need to fold them funny and buy 3 box sets to do that, and I don't like the fact that, that would mean players who don't buy the cardboard maps would be forced to buy 3 copies of a box set or 3 separate box sets. So to me, that's a flaw in the rule, or rather the support for the rule. There are only 5 missions in the book, but there are also 3 starter missions that were in a separate flyer in the box set Skies of Fire, which I happened to purchase. So I may start with the starter missions and work our way up to gain some experience for the pilots and the planes, so I know what their limitations are and how they perform, and then expand into the campaign rules completely. Also going to test my house rules to see if they're workable or if they need more work. And finally, I was only going to use the Taros aircraft, but as usual, missions require bombers, and believe it or not, none of the Imperial aircraft in the Taros campaign book have the bomber rule. So Imperial forces will have to borrow from Rynn's world, so I may consider borrowing some Thunderbolts too. I haven't decided yet. So that was all I wanted to discuss about rules and campaign system at this point in time. Feedback from anyone who's played a campaign, I'd really appreciate that. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you did to adjust it. And feedback on your thoughts on my house rules would also be appreciated. And for those who don't want to listen to my ravings and rantings about the various aircraft in the Rynn's World book, you can stop watching at this point. And I wish you all a good day and good gaming. So let's review aircraft from the Rynn's World book, starting with the ever-popular Ork Dakajet. First of all, it's fast. Fastest aircraft in the Rynn's World book at speed 8, and that's bare metal, nothing added. Nothing will match that speed until the Imperial Lightnings in the Taros campaign book and the Eldar Nightwing in the new Wrath of Angels box. Yet the Ork fighter can still add Wasmek's special option for 1 more speed bonus, bringing it up to speed 9. Nothing faster or as fast in the game so far. At 16 points a copy, it's also the cheapest fighter in the book, and really in the game. Yes, an Imperial Valkyrie is the same base cost and classed as a fighter, but is it really? The only things cheaper so far are the scouts. Depending on your opponents, you can usually outnumber your opponent in the sky and the number of activations when using a Dakajet. Dakajets have great short-range fire, decent medium-range fire, but no long-range. This will encourage players to speed across the board into short range as soon as possible. That's where the Dakajets will cause the most havoc. However, needing 5s to damage and no explosive damage rule means Dakajets are usually rolling 5s to hit and 5s again to damage. They need that high rate of fire at short range to increase the chances of doing any damage. Repeatedly, we saw a decent number of hits only to fail to damage on the reduced number of dice. When they can hit and damage, Dakajets are devastating. The biggest weakness to this jet is that it only has 2 structure points, the lowest structure point size in the book. If hit by a more powerful weapon that has the potential for doing extra damage, it is possible to one-shot a Dakajet out of the sky with a single hit. Unfortunately, in Rynn's World, its primary opponent is the very different Thunderbolts, which can easily do just that. This isn't such a big thing with other races, as more and more pure fighters are appearing in the game and have the same limited 2 structure point weakness, so you will see more opponents suffer from this rule and the same issue. Another weakness is the Ork maneuverability. Compared to the other races so far, the Dakajet only has access to maneuvers 1 through 5 out of 8 maneuvers in the game. However, that still makes the Dakajet the most maneuverable aircraft in the Ork arsenal. All these features, especially the low cost, make the Dakajet a pure swarm fighter. Dakajets want to be out in large numbers, ideally 2 or more Dakajets versus each enemy aircraft in the area of engagement. Dakajets want to come in the game as a mass, scream across the board into short range where their guns are the best, and simply drown the foe in numbers of shots. You could buy extra options or weapons for the Dakajet, but I found if you're spending too much on those extras, you could easily be cheating yourself out of an extra Dakajet or two. These extra fighters are an extra 2 structure points, which could mean the difference in winning and losing the game simply by having more targets to shoot at, more activations, and being distributed across where they can do more damage. So choose extra weapons and aircraft options with care. Usually I would consider this on a mission per mission basis. I do know the popularity of adding more guns, but again, once you start adding those guns, there's easily potential of losing out on an extra fighter that you could have used. Now, onto the Orc Fightabama. The Fightabama is excellent speed, able to go speed 7, and if you want to add the Wasmac Special, you can get the speed increased to 8, matching a bare bones Dakajet. However, at 20 points a copy, the Fightabama is fairly typical starting cost for a fighter. So it's not too expensive, but it's not really cheap enough to use as a swarm fighter. The first advantage the Fightabama has over the Dakajets is it has 3 structure points. You cannot shoot it out of the sky with any single hits. This gives the Fightabama that extra durability that some Orc players will want. Like the Dakajet, Fightabama starts off with 8 firepower at short range attacks, 4 for medium, and no long range firepower. Players will want to get into short range and stay there for best effect. Also, the Fightabama has a tail gun and a turret, both with the tail gunner rule, so combining that may force some flyers to avoid tailing this Orc aircraft. If no one is behind a Fightabama, the turret has side arcs as well. It doesn't have 360 degrees of fire, but with the 4 weapons it already has, do you really need it? Again, like the Dakajet, the guns need 5+ to damage, and there's no explosive rule for this weapon. So once again, players are usually rolling 5s to hit and 5s again to damage. To possibly make up for the weak weapons, the Fightabama has 3 or 4 hard points, thanks to the latest FAQ, depending on your optional weapon choices. These weapons include big bombs, so if that player wishes, they could use the Fightabama in a ground attack role more efficiently than a Dakajet, or carry more rockets for combined air-to-air roll and ground attack roll. By far the greatest weakness of the Fightabama is the throttle and maneuverability. With a throttle of 1, it can be hard to accelerate and decelerate out of trouble, and with maneuvers of only 1 to 4, the Fightabama has the same maneuverability as some of the other races' heavier aircraft. Finally, many players will be stuck trying to decide whether to use Dakajets or fighter bombers in their squadron. Taking a mix as I did in my squadron setup leaves you with a mix that doesn't always work. My recommendation would be, if you want to use Dakajets for anti-aircraft work, don't waste points on fighter bombers. If you want to use fighter bombers for anti-aircraft, you probably don't want to waste points on Dakajets. If you want to use Dakajets for anti-aircraft work, escorting fighter bombers in a ground attack role, that's fine. Just make sure that the mission and the campaign master will let you do that. So onward onto the first Orc heavy aircraft, the Heavy Bomber. First, we start off at 6 structure points. No other race would match that until the release of the Space Marine Thunderhawk. It has okay forward firing power, but you need to consider the side firing power. It has 6 dice on each side as well, each turn. Plus, adding a turret to one side can bump it up to 9 dice. No other aircraft has that sort of side arc firepower. Like a fighter bomber, it has lots of hard points for extra weapons, potentially up to 4 per aircraft, same as a fighter bomber, per the FAQ. Sounds great until you realize the internal or built-in bomb load is only 1 load of 4 bombs, or 4 dice. Players are forced to take 2 pairs of big bombs and a couple pairs of wing bombs to match the bomb load of an Imperial Marauder bomber. That means more points if you want to use bombs as the main weapon. Starting at 28 points, adding extra bombs to an expensive bomber simply makes it more expensive. And that's not counting if you want to add any Orc aircraft upgrades from the start of the squadron list. Also, performance is an issue. At a throttle 1, making speed changes is very slow unless you are trying to dive or climb to increase the rate. To make things worse, if you were to add the extra armor, yes, you get that potential of a 6+ save from damage, but you also reduce your maximum speed of 4 down to speed 3. That'll give you only 2 speeds, speed 2 and speed 3. Anything else is a potential stall or I'm ripping my wings off speed. Finally, the model is just physically large on the table. It's hard to squeeze models into adjacent hexes as the heavy bomber overhangs most of the hex sides. Rules recommend you keep some spare maneuver dials for when you're getting too crowded. You probably need an extra spare base for each heavy bomber you take. And for the final Orc heavy aircraft, we have the Grot Bomber. First, we start off with the same 6 structure points as a heavy bomber. Makes sense, they're basically the same aircraft, just different weapons. For troop carrying missions, the Grot Bomber can deploy 3 points of transport, making it the best in the book for these types of missions. For a bomber, great forward firepower. Unfortunately, you cannot add turret firepower to the front arc. The bomber does have 2 dorsal turrets, but they cover the side arcs only, and with far less firepower. The firepower on this airplane is all in the nose. Starting at 28 points, it's as expensive as the heavy bomber, with, in my mind, less ability. That's not counting any of the Orc aircraft upgrades from the start of the list. Also, performance is an issue. It has a throttle 1, making same speed changes as the heavy bomber. To make it worse, if you add the extra armor, you get the 6+ save, but you're again slowing your maximum speed from 4 to 3. So again, same concerns as the heavy bomber. And as with the heavy bomber, the Grot Bomber is just physically large on the table, so it's hard to squeeze models to adjacent hexes as the heavy bomber. Just overhangs most of the hexes. You'll probably want to keep those extra maneuver bases handy. My final complaints are regarding the Grot bombs. The bare bones configuration only allows 2 bombs. That's it. If you've watched my battles in this campaign, Grot bombs are very random and difficult to hit with. If they don't hit the first turn of flight, they probably won't hit at all. 2 is just not enough to make it worthwhile. You can upgrade to get 2 more for a total of 4 Grot bombs for a total of 8 more points. That brings an expensive Grot bomber to a whopping 36 points with no other options. In a way, that's okay because there are no other weapon options, just your standard Orc upgrades from the front of the list. Overall, I was very disappointed in the performance of the Grot bombs themselves, and the only good thing in this campaign regarding the Grot bomber was the extra transport capability. It managed to eke out a few extra points when transporting loads gave you points. If I were to take another Grot bomber in a future game, I think I would spend the points for the extra Grot bombs, just for the extra chances of them being able to do something. Finally, there is a question. Can Grot bombs target ground targets? Believe it or not, strict interpretation of the rules right now, they cannot. Grot bombs lack the rule ground attack, and the only other way to do a ground attack is with strafing runs. So, as a Grot bomb is not a strafing weapon, you cannot attack ground targets with them, despite the name. Now we're into the Imperial Navy. First, the Imperial fighters in this book both have 3 structure points, making it impossible to one-shot them in a single hit. That's the biggest advantage I see of the Imperials over the Orcs at this time. Also, the Thunderbolt has 2 types of weapons: autocannon for short range and medium range, las cannons for medium range and long range. This means they can cover the entire firing range with at least 1 shot each turn at targets in their front arcs. However, both weapons do get maximum number of shots at medium range, 6 autocannon shots and 2 las cannon shots, making it obvious where this aircraft prefers to keep its targets. With a minimum speed of 2 and a maximum speed of 6, it's not the fastest fighter around, but does have decent speed. However, the Thunderbolt is still more maneuverable than its Orc contemporaries, able to use maneuvers 1 through 6. For external weapon options, you have decent choices between air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles as well as bombs. These weapons will allow you to use the Thunderbolt as a true multi-purpose fighter, equally capable going after both air and ground targets, both with basic weapons and add-on weapons for extra speciality. The only bad side is that the additional weapons are all specialized to the type of targets they can be used against, unlike the Orc rockets, which are multi-purpose and can be used for both air and ground targets. But with the shots they can put out bare bones, the Thunderbolt is a true multi-purpose fighter, good in both air combat, patrol, and aggressor roles, as well as ground attack roles. First, the Thunderbolt Fury, often referred to as just a Fury, have 3 structure points just like the Thunderbolts they're based off of. This makes it impossible to one-shot them from the sky with a single hit. Also, the Fury have 2 types of weapons, the Avenger Bolt Cannon for short and medium range and the Las Cannons for medium and long range. Once again, this covers the entire shooting range with at least 1 shot every turn at any targets in the front arcs. Finally, the biggest advantage of the Fury over the Thunderbolt is that both weapon types explode and do extra damage on a 6+. This makes the damage potential per turn much higher than a regular Thunderbolt. Same as the Thunderbolt, both the Fury's weapons get maximum firepower at medium range. The Avenger Bolt Cannon has 7 shots and the Las Cannon has 2. Again, minimum speed of 2, maximum speed of 6. Not the fastest fighters, but still a decent speed. Same maneuverability as a Thunderbolt, able to use maneuvers 1 through 6. It is still more agile than the Orc fighters. Finally, the Fury has access to the same weapons as regular Thunderbolt, but bare bones, it's just as, if not more capable of any mission that the regular Thunderbolt does. So our first Imperial Heavy will be the Marauder Bomber. Now, unfortunately, it got no use during this campaign. This was more due to the defensive properties of Marauder Destroyer as opposed to the Marauder Bomber. I have to admit, I like the Destroyer for most missions over the Bomber. So I'm really going to be going off past experience and impressions for the most part. So for the Marauder Bomber, first, it has a decent size structure of 5 structure points. It has excellent bomb load with 8 attack dice and 3 separate loads that you can drop, and that's before you add any extra wing bombs if you want them. It has speed range of 2 to 5, which is a decent speed for a heavy flyer. A huge advantage is there's no speed penalty if you decide to take the armored cockpit, unlike for the Orcs and their extra armor. For its forward arc, it has a twin Las Cannon in the nose turret. That gives you a single shot long range and 2 shots at medium range. There's no shots at short range. You're totally dependent on the dorsal turret and the tail gunner turret for that, and they only have limited firepower, and only the dorsal turret has forward firing ability at this point, and it's only for the same level and above. For external weapon options, you have decent choices between air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles as well as bombs. I found the Marauder Bomber in other games to be a decent aircraft if you're doing a bombing mission. The Las Cannons can and have destroyed ground targets at long and medium range, but it's less likely to destroy ground targets with Las Cannons than it is with bombs. It simply comes down to the probability of hitting with only 1 or 2 shots, as opposed to dropping 8 dice worth of bombs. Having said that, I have destroyed forward targets with a single volley of Las Cannon shots due to the extra damage roll it has, and I will point out it took me by surprise as much as my opponent. However, I almost always prefer the Marauder Destroyer unless points is an issue, and that's the big advantage of the Marauder Bomber over the Marauder Destroyer. You can take a bare bones bomber, add a couple of options, and still have points for an extra fighter that you would not have if you took a destroyer or 2. Finally, we're going to cover the Marauder Destroyer. Again, decent structure size being 5 structure points. The destroyer has an excellent tail gunner, replacing a standard bolter with a 320 firing power, with what looks like twin assault cannons for a 630 firepower, making tailing a destroyer more dangerous, especially at short range. With its forward-firing autocannons, it has good short-range firepower and excellent medium-range firepower with 9 dice at medium range. Unfortunately, the destroyer has no long-range firepower. At a speed of 2 to 5, though, this makes it a decent speed for a heavy flyer. It's usually able to get into medium range fairly quickly. Also, it is the only Imperial transport in the first book, and sadly it only transports 1 point. Fortunately, the Imperials see more transport options in the following Book 2, the Taros campaign, and with the Space Marines in their new release. For external weapon options, you have all the same choices as with the Marauder Bomber, air-to-air ground, and air-to-air missiles. This makes up for its biggest weakness, poor bomb load. It only has 4 dice per load as opposed to the 8 of a Marauder Bomber. You can purchase extra wing bombs for the destroyer so that you can match the number of potential dice a Marauder Bomber can drop. Having said that, a destroyer can probably take out most ground targets simply by strafing at medium range for a couple of turns. Finally, the destroyer is more expensive point-wise. You may be better off taking 1 or 2 Marauder Bombers to save points on other things, rather than spending points on the destroyer, especially in games with low points costs. So that's it for the campaign review. I am planning on doing the Taros Air War in the future. I just don't know when, or whether Imperialis will be the next thing I post. It probably will, as long as these isolation periods are on. I should have an idea of what I'm doing before the new year, and I'll keep everyone posted. In the meantime, keep safe, have fun, and good gaming.